Welcome to the final keynote of VWBPE 2020. I am Lorraine Mockford, LoriVonne Lustre, the VWBPE Programs Chair. In January, I heard some interesting rumbles across the interwebs that really something cool was about to happen in virtual reality. The rumbles became an earthquake and shaking up the VR and educational conference environments. Coincidentally, these rumbles were happening the same time as the COVID-19 pandemic was beginning. It is my pleasure to introduce today Lorelle VanFossen. Yay! Lorelle is one of the co-founders of Educators in VR, along with Daniel Dabosky-Bryant. In February, the Educators in VR produced the world's largest immersive virtual reality conference, 24 hours a day for 6 days across 5 virtual platforms. Quite the earthquake. Lorelle will teaches an average of 20 hours a day, or 20 hours a week, 20 hours a day, 20 hours a week in VR. She's also a keynote speaker, an educator and trainer in VR and the physical world as a professional web publisher, blogger, and author on digital storytelling and web sharing and social technologies. Lorelle is an author who has published over 10,000 articles on web publishing and digital storytelling. Wow. Her groundbreaking bravery in web publishing and web standardization changed the face of the web, promoted intellectual property protections and enforcements on the web, and developed blogging as the force it is for sharing, activism, and citizen journalism today. Lorelle is also a world-renowned breaker of things. She is here to share her lessons learned in producing a virtual immersive conference. I will be managing the questions, so please keep these until the end or send them to me via IM. Over to you, Lorelle, and remember to push that green button in world.
All right. Thank you, and welcome. I am so honored to be here. My name is Lorelle, and I'm the co-founder of Educators in VR. And somewhere out there is my partner in Educators in VR, Daniel Dabosky-Bryant. Educators in VR began 18 months ago as a conversation between educators in Altspace VR. I suggested that we create a meetup to bring educators together to discuss the challenges of integrating VR into the classroom and call it something like, I don't know, Educators in VR. We did. We expected about, 12 to 25 people to show up. 180 showed up. Little did we know how relevant and timely we were with our passion to bring educators, learners, researchers, and passionate enthusiasts together as a grassroots movement to integrate XR technology into education. Little did we know, over a year later, our world would be changed with this. Recognize it? It's amazing how something so tiny, so invisible, has changed the world so fast. We are living history right now. It's amazing. How many of us, is this week 1, 2, or maybe it's 3, practicing this new concept known as self-isolation? Billions of people around the world are taking a deep breath all at the same time. And I want to remind everyone, you are not alone. Because in VR, in Second Life, on the web, you're never alone. I mean, look around, you're never alone. You are part of this beautiful interconnected world that we've created as a part of something. We just have a new normal, and we'll get through this. And this new normal is changing so many things. How do we self-isolate and still keep our normal? This is the question of the past month, isn't it? How do we keep our jobs, our businesses, our associations, our relationships going without that face-to-face interaction. Zoom, Google Hangouts, Slacks, Microsoft Teams, all online conferencing tools are in high demand, as are virtual platforms. So how do you respond to those questions? As we explore the goals of a real-world conference that brings people together from around the state, the country, even the world, we find that conferences offer us opportunities for education, for social interaction, networking, building relationships, shared experiences, and some sense of reward, be it financial gain, business connections, or cool swag that tends to fill our suitcases with useless pens, papers, stickers, buttons, etc. So in the real world, conferences offer us connections, their relationships, experiences, their opportunities. Is it possible to have the same experience in a virtual conference? Okay, I'm singing to the choir. I know, as you all celebrate 13 years of this amazing conference, you know it is possible. You are proof. Yes, you can have the same connections, the same relationships, same experiences. As for opportunities, I believe they increase when you go virtual, as so many barriers are tossed aside. The Educators in VR 2020 International Summit was also proof of concept that virtual conferences work. Held in February, it featured 170 speakers presenting over 150 different events across 5 virtual platforms over 6 days. There was an estimated 6,000 event attendees supported by about 75 volunteer support team members. Our cost in US dollars, about $330, which included $150 for a power generator. Honestly, huge storms were hitting Wales, causing massive power blackouts, and Daniel needed to keep connected to the web. He didn't need it, but it was something to consider as you host your own event. So it was an amazing success. Now, we didn't set out to break any records or do anything special. We didn't have budget, no advertising, no marketing, only word of mouth. Requests for speakers went out the 1st of December with a January 3rd deadline. How stupid of us. Honestly, we expected maybe 30, maybe 60 responses. When the applications reached 150 of them, all of them amazing, Daniel and I discussed scaling the event upwards. After all, virtual reality is infinite, right? Right? Okay, not right. But we pushed the limits. We opened up to 170 speakers before closing down the applications, and they still kept coming in. If you wonder if immersive VR conferences are viable, and if academics want to share their research and experiences, I can tell you, just totally yes. Yes, emphatically yes. We learned many lessons about hosting and producing this enormous event. I want to share one of the lessons learned from one of our speakers and attendees, Tom Furness, the genius inventor behind virtual reality. He said, after the event, he told us about an encounter that he had after his first keynote presentation. He said, at the International Summit, I had a conversation with a person that felt really real. I connected with her and felt her presence, and a relationship was formed. It was a paradigm shift. This really works. It brought tears to my eyes. This really works. We wouldn't have VR headsets if it weren't for the groundbreaking work and the inventions of Tom Furness dating back to the 1960s. He watched VR grow from a huge helmet headset connected to a computer the size of a living room to something we can wear like sunglasses. While education was on his mind for decades, the impact of social VR wasn't on his radar. This really works, and we are working it. So his statement is one of the first lessons that I learned from producing one of the world's largest virtual conferences. For all the speakers, developing the schedule, the virtual worlds, managing the volunteer support team, for all the sleepless nights and the mind-breaking work, I learned that the true power in meeting virtual conferences come from those connections, those precious moments where hearts and minds intertwine and lives are changed. Virtual reality works. It really works, and you are all proof of that magic. Here I am on this asteroid in this amazing virtual world, but you know what? This isn't where I want to be. I want to be with you, learning from you, exchanging ideas, playing devil's advocate, and learning your story about your journey. That's the real lesson learned. So let's learn together the other lessons I learned producing a virtual conference, and I'm eager to hear the lessons you've learned as well. We're still in the early days of semantics, VR, AR, MR, WMR, XR. We've had virtual experiences like Second Life for a long, long time. But immersive experiences, 360 or less degrees of freedom through VR, are still new. Now, how do we define these? Should we? Should an experience in Second Life be judged differently from one in Altspace VR, Engage, Roomy, Somnium Space, etc.? No, absolutely not. To help us clarify the distinction, which is huge and tiny at the same time, a virtual conference requires a computer. An immersive virtual reality conference may require a device. Most VR platforms for social and education are designed for HMDs, head-mounted displays, or more commonly known as VR devices, but also 2D desktop computers. Does that change the experience? Some say yes, others say no. I'm not here to argue which is better or righter. If you put your whole heart into either experience, it's a shared experience. It's immersive. It's just in VR, you see the world around you through your eyes. I want to set aside the distinctions of virtual versus immersive and focus on the aspects of a virtual conference in general, like this one. Now, if you take away the caterers and the hotels and such, and the logistics of a virtual conference, it's basically the same. It's about people and project management. You still have to manage the speakers, sell tickets, spread the word, set up event spaces. Our research, when we dug into what it cost producing a real world conference, ranges from around US $20,000 to $1 million. We averaged the average cost for attending a real world conference and found it to be around $2,000 for tickets, hotel, airlines, airfare, food, etc. Now compare this to our estimates for a virtual conference. The range is $500,000 to $100,000 for a typical few-day conference. Those costs support administration, management staff, possibly paying the platform, and any world building and customization. The Educators in VR International Summit, the 6-day event, we calculated would cost a minimum about $800,000. When we look at this from the perspective of a per person cost, it's around $400 to $2,000 per person. It's about the same as a real world conference, but there's a difference. This would be the purchase of a new VR headset or an upgrade to their computer, a reusable resource. So when an employee talks to a business, their company, about the viability and validity of a virtual conference, the bean counters tend to take over. They need justification. How's this going to make us money? And when it comes to VR, what do you think they think of when they think VR? Yeah, they think toy. They think toy. Yes, a VR headset represents a toy. So how do you justify the expense of a toy as a replacement for the impact and business potential of a virtual conference? When you attend a real world conference, the value is the reward. What do you get out of it? Do you make new business connections, strengthen relationships, be exposed to business opportunities, make some deals, learn new things that will benefit your business? What do you get out of it that will make your employer happy, more money, and justify all those beans? Well, real world event conferences are one-shot event. You only have that moment to make those things happen. But equate that to the multiple uses of a VR headset, to many events, to educational experiences, meetups, meetings, conferences, and multiple experiences. Okay, and yes, it's also a toy. So we had one business owner, this is fascinating. She told us that she usually brings together her 50 employees for a meeting twice a year at the cost of about $100,000 each time, totaling $20,000 annually. She ordered 50 Oculus Quests for a total of $25,000. They now meet in VR more often, feel like they're right there and together in the same room. What a cost savings. So tell your bean counters about that story. And we're hearing more and more of those stories all the time because bean counters are paying attention. Yes, VR still has some challenges to overcome. As with all changes in technology, there's the nausea and motion sickness aspect, which actually impacts very few people, specifically those with the motion sickness gene, something they can't change but might adapt. So eliminate that issue by choosing the right platform, and they may enter in 2D or desktop mode like you do with Second Life, and the problem goes away. Recent research found that if people take VR slowly, no more than around 15 to 20 minutes a day, they will adapt and overcome motion sickness. Use of blinders and shades that appear at the edges of the field of view is now a standard feature of VR devices and platforms with the option to turn it off, and that helps. However, research is showing us if they power through it, a form of Pavlov's dog effect takes over. They train their brains to feel nauseous every time they look at a VR headset. So be careful. Do this slowly. And if you're inclined towards motion sickness, just be careful. Slowly, 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 slowly. I think this is one of the biggest lessons. A virtual conference is no different from a real world conference, except you can attend in your pajamas. How many are in your pajamas right now? Come on. So our PR team had a field day with a selfie summit challenge. Photograph yourself and show the world how you attended the Educators in VR International Summit. It was so much fun and fascinating to see the ways people interact with VR and virtual events. Y'all should do this. So people all over the world submitted their pictures of themselves in the real world and in VR. Just wonderful. Just wonderful. You should do that. Somebody's saying do it, do it, do it, do it. Yeah, get those posted. You picture yourself in your PJs or whatever it is. What this did was another one of those lessons. It put a human face on virtual people. It's important to remind people that we are real people behind these avatars, people with our own minds, our own thoughts, our own beliefs, our cultures, our experiences, and truths. We feel pain. Hey, we sensitive people here in the metaverse of immersive culture, aren't we? Okay? So Andy Fidel, a VR scout, is the diva of VR and social media. She created these speaker cards to put that human face on our speakers, making them real to the public, to the audience and to the public. Our Selfie Summit did much the same thing. These remind the audience that these are real people giving of themselves, sharing their passion, their knowledge, their expertise, not just cartoon characters. I love Second Life. I love this conference, the ability to bring people together from around the world through their computers and through their imagination. I mean, look at us. We're freaking meeting in an asteroid belt. Okay, this is incredible. incredible. It's amazing. You can do this because everyone here is tethered to a computer somewhere doing the heavy lifting when it comes to the processing power. In VR, we're limited by the technology embraced by our audience. I give full credit and applause to AltSpace VR being one of the few social and events VR platforms truly dedicated to being as close to device agnostic as possible. So when people complain that it isn't just like real life or Ready Player One, ready, I explain that AltSpace VR is a racetrack that accommodates a VW Bug as well as a Ferrari. From Samsung Gear to the Microsoft HoloLens, you can access that VR platform. You know, I mean, look around you, how much time and energy goes into creating an immersive event space. We took a much simpler route and narrowed our choices down to conformity and familiarity. The majority of our audience and speakers were totally brand new to VR, and we compromised accordingly. We narrowed it down to 2 event spaces, highly customized and optimized for multiple uses, just like this. We had the event space and a social space. Now, our team spent an amazing amount of time analyzing the speaker and audience traffic flow, the user experience, the movement through virtual platforms to the event space, much as this team has done here. I arrived in a green room and a holding space and then was moved up here into the presentation space just as you, the audience, moved through your journey to get here. For the speakers, their experience began with the International Summit, began in the VIP lounge or check-in, and then flowed into the event space. As we had single events covering multiple hours of speakers, if a speaker was still engaged with the audience, at the end of their time slot, we'd move them into the back of the event space to a teleporter to move into the social space where the conversation could continue. This worked so well. Others are adopting it to keep their event on track, to allow the interaction to continue. What surprised us most was the audience traffic flow. Big surprise. We found that many students, even adults, during school and work hours, participated in VR equipment that was provided for them. But they loved it so much that after school or work was out, or the batteries died, they raced to our live stream to continue watching. And I know there's people watching on the live stream here as well. One teacher told us that students would participate in many of the events in their school with assigned VR gear or in 2D in the classroom. But then on the long school bus commute, they share their phones and watch the live stream on the bus. And at home, they were so excited about the topics that we were doing and the different speakers we had. We learned that people adapt, but they also have expectations. When the demand is high, they become creative. And we event producers and educators need to adapt to how they adapt to the technology. So we learned to be creative with event spaces. This was a huge lesson. We designed our event spaces to accommodate hundreds of people. While the average attendance was about 80 across the entire 6-day event for each of the events, there were typically 20 to 40 attendees at a single event, at an individual event. So we need to be more creative with our event spaces. But I'm preaching to the choir. I'm on an asteroid. Your innovative and inventive world creation team needs some serious applause and love. This is amazing. You've already got this, but we needed to learn that lesson, and we're going to be much more creative going forward. Now, who says your event can't be underwater or on the moon or in outer space, or in a space few people have ever imagined, unleashed by the potential of world building? And one of the biggest lessons we learned is that when you host a real world event, everyone is in the same time zone. Time zone becomes a fixed point in time, in place, in space. You tell someone their next event is at 11 a.m. There's no questions. Host a virtual event? It's time zone hell. It changes everything. It dictates time, place, space, and lives. And we learned most of the world doesn't know how to tell what time zone they're in. It was insane. When you take away the geolocation of event, time becomes irrelevant as well as highly relevant. Is it 12 noon or is it 12 midnight? Without military time, you can't tell day or night in VR. But you still have to show up on time and in time for an event. And not all time zones are equal. Separated by 60 minutes, 1 hour each. Nepal is 45 minutes. We added a speaker from Nepal and the whole schedule fell apart. Once we realized the issue, we moved their event by 15 minutes and the schedule went back to normal. These are the things they don't teach you in school that are critical to know when you're producing a virtual event. Seriously, we went through Excel, Google Sheet, and Google Sheets functions and formulas. We tried making charts with a meeting planner at timeanddate.com, which is invaluable and saved us so many times. We tried everything. And then, seriously, one sleepless night, my husband rolled over and he ordered me to talk about what was keeping me awake all night so I could get some sleep by sharing my time zone pain. I told him, and he ordered me to try Outlook.com's calendar and rolled over and went back to sleep. Bugger. I jumped out of bed, I hit the computer, and I fell in love. 2 clicks, you change the time zone. It saved us. If you know better, an easier way, please share it with us. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a good enough solution. But let me know, because time zones. And when you take away time from the equation of scheduling events, it changes your perspective. Your audience isn't just who can travel from point A to point B and afford your conference. Your audience is now those who are awake at any moment in time. Educators in VR is hosting the Students in VR conference in May, with students producing and presenting the 2-day conference. Time zones became complicated as new data out for the United States reports 22% of households don't have home internet. In the Navajo and Cherokee tribal school districts, leaders in our Students in VR conference, 98% of students have no access to Wi-Fi or computers at home. Outside of the classroom, they are dependent on their mobile phones. As the event involves European and Asian teachers and students, we've had to schedule the event for time zones associated with the open school hours for each of the main time zones. Things are more complicated with the new self-isolation challenges because schools are closed. But we've divided the official conference hours into 2 blocks. School hours during North American times, school hours during EU time zones. Then we're going to stream and record all the sessions, allowing students to access at their convenience, not ours. Time zones change how we work when the fences are off the borders and we take our lives virtual. And when you remove the physical of a virtual conference, you make it a green conference. Now, I'm not going to go into all the math, but Don Balazat, a geoscientist and educator in Arizona, he analyzed for us the impact of a real-world conference versus a virtual conference, including the impact of the servers to support the virtual conference. In a nutshell, our 6-day global conference saved, drum roll, 7,587,489 kilograms of CO2 from entering the atmosphere. That's huge. And we have all the math and sciences on our website at Educators in VR. I'm not going to go into it. So we also learned that, there's a learning curve associated with virtual and VR, but it also applies to training the audience, speakers, support team for this immersive experience. Yes, you have to train your audience. For AltSpace users, just like in Second Life users, there's a training process that helps new users to figure out how it works, how to navigate, etc. It's very helpful, but it also causes problems. We had to prepare our audience and speakers for the 5 to 15 minutes this introduction process takes. So we encourage them to enter AltSpace VR, Engage, and the other platforms weeks in advance to familiarize themselves with the process and the environment and allow them to be accustomed to this new way of moving and communicating. We trained our speakers on how to present in VR, which is very different from presenting in the real world, where gestures and facial expressions are part of the performance. They needed to learn how to interact with the audience, how to move around, and how to, especially how to interact with the audience when they are muted and through the Q&A process. They learned to rethink how to produce slides, including videos, in their presentations, because presenting in VR is different as it is here. So combining new methods for presenting slides, speaking to virtual audiences, and moving around VR, trust me, we spent many days training and preparing speakers to speak and to present. We had 75 volunteers come together at the last minute to help support Educators in VR's International Summit. It was beautiful. They called themselves Scrappy, and they were. This is one of our volunteers, Michael Zhang. He's close to graduating from the University of Washington. We're so proud. He stepped out of class to stand in the freezing cold with his laptop, supported on a little stand to connect to a voice chat meeting in Discord. His laptop kept overheating, so he was fanning it with his notebook to cool it down, just so he could stay connected. That's Scrappy. I just love that. This is the face of determination, the commitment and the passion that it took to make our event happen, as it does with this one. You may not see it, but this is part of why we do this. They want it. They need it. They want to be part of the process, so let them. Get out of their way. Step in when you need a guide. Learn to trust your team. If you have the right team, it's glorious. If not, clean house and get the right team. Encourage them to lead, to take risks, to experiment. This is all a big experiment. Not just virtual and VR, but life. We're all experimenting. I tell my students all the time to make mistakes. If you aren't making mistakes, you aren't learning. Mistakes are good. Screwing up is good. Getting it wrong is right. Be brave. Push the limits. It's the only way we learn. And guess what? This shit is just getting started. News, I don't have to tell you. You've already figured it out. You guys are walking the walk. You're prepared for virtual experiences, but the rest of the world isn't. We are pioneers in virtual worlds and virtual reality. We are the experts. We are being bombarded with requests on how to convert a real world meeting or conference into a virtual one. We tell them you can't just flip a switch and make it happen. They need experts like y'all and educators in VR with the experience to do it right. People have to want this. We are the evangelists. We are the leaders. We need to help them and guide them, because this shit is just getting started and it's happening now. We are all a part of this. Honey, it's history right now. We need to take people out of their comfort zones and introduce them to the possible, to meetings in Notre Dame and other famous and historical cultural places and spaces for no other reason than because we can. Educators in VR's motto is that the sky is no longer the limit. We take educators and students onto the moon and engage in other platforms. We cross boundaries without fear or restriction, giving a new meaning to inclusion. We're also challenging virtual platforms to become more inclusive. Pardon me as I step onto one of my famous soapboxes, but we have to do more, and we have further to go. It's a short distance, but we can do this together. While I appreciate what someone is doing in my language, I want to know what Evgeny is in Moscow, how he's changing the lives of his students with VR. I want to know how Jorge in Argentina is using 3D models of the heart to change the future of medicine. We need to break down the language barriers in web browsers, in entertainment, and on virtual platforms. I hear that Second Life is working on doing that right now, showing us the way to make this possible. Altspace VR claimed that they had translation capabilities 5 years ago, then they lost funding. Since the purchase by Microsoft, their focus is smaller. We need to scale it up, folks. This is the time to use all the AI and computing power possible to break down this final barrier. If the sky is no longer the limit, we need to bring all the languages and cultures of this world with us as we sail off into those stars. We also learned that we can't do it without you. I believe in collaboration. I believe in not doing it alone. Even if, as we are self-isolating and separating ourselves as a society, we are connected and interconnected. Virtual reality helps us break down those barriers, and I believe will change the future of humanity as the technology advances and the ease of access improves. This is my wall of love behind me. Oh, I'm going to start crying. These people stepped up and stepped out and stepped beyond their comfort zones to make our Educators in VR International Summit a success. The people on this list were not, the people not on this list were just as important. Don't forget that we don't do all this virtual shit without the support of our loved ones, our family, our friends, and our acquaintances. They are our support team. During long sleepless nights of the conference, one of my best friends texted me this. It says, "Hey there, sweetie, brush your teeth." She sent it not because I have a dental hygiene issue, but because she loves me. And she knows me, and she knows that when I dive deep into something, I go really deep, and I forget the little things like hygienes. Okay, this is true. My team had competitions as to who could go the longest during the conference without a shower. And in virtual reality, you never have a bad hair day, and no one can smell you. But it reminds me that while we're enshrouded in our immersive worlds and our headgear, we could not do it without the people who love us. And we need to remember that and appreciate them back. And we did it. It took a village. It took a commitment. And most of all, it took believing. It took faith. We knew we could do it. We did it. We learned some powerful lessons along the way, and we're still learning. And we are the evangelists. We want to do this again and again and again. Educators in VR, Educators in VR hosts weekly workshops every Tuesday in Altspace VR, and we'd like to invite you to join us. And we will come here. We have other events in Altspace, Engage, Rumi, and other platforms exploring and discussing how to integrate virtual reality and spatial technologies into education and research. It's our passion. We have workshops, classes on that, and help educators teach their subjects in VR. We just finished the world's first 24-hour English lesson with Michael McDonald in Altspace VR. I'm so proud. And Engage and in Rumi. It was a fundraiser for the Red Cross Italy at this time of crisis. I am still waiting to hear the total number, but I think it was almost 2,000 euros were raised. We have the Students in VR conference coming up in May. And we're partnered to help the iLearn, the Immersive Research Network conference in June. And we have so many other events that are coming up. If you'd like to learn more about how to develop your own virtual meeting, your meetup or conference, Educators in VR is hosting free training sessions in Altspace VR on how to present, manage slides, hosting, moderation in modular little 1-hour sessions. So check those out. We have a very, very active Discord channel, and we are all over the social networks, and you can learn more about us at educatorsinvr.com. So thank you for letting me share my lessons learned from producing a virtual conference at a virtual conference.